I never expected to see my face on a 40-foot billboard overlooking the busiest intersection in Portland, especially not after my stepmother Diane had deliberately excluded me from the family portrait that hung in my father's office for 7 years. "You're not Mitchell by blood," she'd whispered when she thought no one could hear, scheduling the photographer for a day she knew I had an important dance competition across state lines. But life has a funny way of restoring balance when you least expect it. As I stood there in the rain, staring up at my own image towering above Mitchell Media's headquarters, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. The company my father built, the legacy my stepmother tried to push me away from, now literally had my face on it. But let me back up and tell you how we got here. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Cassidy Parker, and until I was 12, it was just my dad, James Mitchell, and me against the world. My mother passed away when I was 4, cancer, quick and merciless, leaving my father to raise me alone in our modest 2-bedroom home in the suburbs of Portland. Dad owned a small advertising agency that he'd built from nothing, working late nights while I did homework on the office couch. We had a rhythm, a partnership really. I helped organize his client files using my color coding system, and he never missed my dance recitals, always sitting front row center with that ridiculous oversized camcorder. Everything changed when Diane Adams waltzed into our lives. She was the new financial director at a company that had hired my dad's agency. Tall, elegant, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a dazzling smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember the first time she came to our house for dinner. She complimented everything: the quaint charm of our home, Dad's ambitious little business, even my unique fashion sense. Each compliment felt like a tiny paper cut. Dad was smitten immediately. Within 8 months, they were married, and we moved into Diane's sprawling Tudor-style home in the affluent West Hills neighborhood. With the marriage came 2 stepbrothers, Trevor, 16 and athletic, and Mason, 14 and permanently attached to his gaming console. They weren't unkind, just indifferent to the sudden appearance of a 12-year-old stepsister who preferred books and dance to their world of sports and video games. "You'll love it here, Cass," Dad promised, his eyes bright with optimism I couldn't bring myself to dampen. "It's a new beginning for all of us." The new beginning felt suspiciously like an erasure. Slowly, our family photos disappeared from the walls, replaced by professional portraits of Diane, Trevor, and Mason. My mother's antique writing desk, the one piece of her I had left, was relocated to the attic because it didn't match the aesthetic. Dad didn't notice or chose not to, busy as he was with the sudden expansion of Mitchell Media, fueled by Diane's connections and financial guidance. For 3 years, I navigated this new reality, finding refuge in dance and academics, while the distance between Dad and me grew wider by the day. When I turned 15, I was accepted into an elite dance program, the same one my mother had once attended. The day I got the acceptance letter, I rushed home, bursting through the door to share the news with Dad. Instead, I overheard Diane in the study, her voice low but clear. "James, you need to think about the future of Mitchell Media. Trevor has the charisma and business acumen to take over someday. Mason has your creative eye, but Cassidy, she's just different. Dancing won't build our family legacy." There was a pause before my father responded, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "She's my daughter, Diane." "Of course she is," Diane replied smoothly. "And we'll always support her hobbies. But when it comes to the company, we need to be practical about succession planning." I stood frozen in the hallway, a letter clutched in my hand, as my father sighed in what sounded like defeat. "I suppose you're right. She's more like her mother anyway. Artistic, dreamy. Maybe the business world isn't for her." Something cracked inside me that day, not just my heart, but a fundamental understanding of my place in the world. The dad who had once believed I could do anything now saw me as somehow less than his stepsons, less practical, less valuable, less his. The exclusion from the family portrait happened 3 months later. Dad had mentioned a photographer coming on Saturday for an updated company website photo. Saturday was the regional dance competition I'd been preparing for all semester, a fact noted on the large family calendar hanging in the kitchen. "Oh, I completely forgot about your little dance thing," Diane said with practiced concern when I pointed out the conflict. "But we can't reschedule the photographer. He's booked solid for months, and we need these photos for the quarterly investor meeting." I looked to Dad, expecting him to intervene, to remember how important this competition was to me. Instead, he glanced at his watch and said, "Maybe we can get some nice shots of you when you're back, sweetheart." But when I returned Sunday evening, medal in hand and heart full of accomplishment no one was there to witness, the photography equipment was gone. Monday morning, I passed Dad's office and saw the new portrait hanging proudly behind his desk. Diane, Trevor, Mason, and Dad, a perfect nuclear family. No empty space suggesting someone was missing, no acknowledgement that I existed at all. I stood in the doorway, staring at the portrait until Dad noticed me. His eyes followed mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something like shame cross his face. "Cass," he began. "Congratulations on the competition, by the way," I said, my voice strangely calm despite the storm raging inside me. "I won first place. Mom would have been proud." I walked away before he could respond, something fundamental shifting inside me. That night, I sat at my window seat and made a decision that would change everything. If I wasn't going to be included in the Mitchell family legacy, I would build my own. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That night, as I sat staring at the family portrait I wasn't part of, I realized something important. Breaking down wouldn't get me anywhere. Diane would probably love to see me in tears, convinced I was too emotional and impractical for the business world. Instead, I channeled my heart into something more productive, a plan. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. While the house was still quiet, I slipped into my father's home office. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to understand what I was up against. Dad had always been open about his business with me before Diane came along. Now, it felt like entering foreign territory. Mitchell Media had transformed from the small agency I'd grown up in. There were now organizational charts, expansion plans, and financial projections I barely recognized. As I flipped through folders, a document caught my eye. Succession planning. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a detailed roadmap for the company's future, with Trevor slated to take over as CEO when Dad retired, and Mason positioned to lead the creative department. There was no mention of me anywhere. Carefully photographed the documents with my phone and returned everything exactly as I'd found it. This wasn't about sabotage, it was about knowledge. If I was going to navigate this situation, I needed to understand the terrain. At school that day, I sought out Mr. Callahan, my business studies teacher. He'd worked in advertising for 20 years before becoming a teacher, and unlike most adults in my life, he treated me like my thoughts mattered. "Mr. Callahan, I need your advice," I said during lunch. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to learn about advertising and media strategy, where would they start? He studied me over his reading glasses. Hypothetically, that someone might start by understanding what makes them unique in the industry. Advertising isn't just about selling products, it's about telling stories that resonate. And if that someone was young, with no connections or experience, then that someone would have the advantage of seeing things from a perspective others miss, he replied, reaching for a notepad. "Here's what I'd recommend reading. Also, there's a summer internship program at Wallace Communications. They specifically look for high school students with fresh perspectives. I stared at the list he'd written. Wallace Communications? Isn't that Mitchell Media's biggest competitor? Mr. Callahan smiled slightly. Is it? I hadn't noticed. I left, with a reading list, an internship application, and the first stirrings of something that felt like hope. That afternoon, instead of going straight home, I headed to the public library and immersed myself in everything I could find about advertising, media strategy, and business management. For the next week, I maintained a careful facade at home. I was polite to Diane, cordial to my stepbrothers, and purposely distant with Dad. I stopped trying to share my achievements or connect. Instead, I observed. I noticed how Diane subtly undermined me in conversations, how she positioned her sons in Dad's attention, and how my father, once my biggest champion, had become a passive participant in his own household. "You're quiet these days, Cass," Dad remarked one evening as I was heading upstairs after dinner. "Just busy with school and dance," I replied with a neutral smile. "Everything okay?" For a moment, I almost told him. About the hurt, about finding the succession plans, about feeling erased from his life. But then Diane called from the kitchen. "James, can you help me with these investment papers? We need to decide about Trevor's trust fund." The flicker of concern on Dad's face vanished as he turned toward his wife's voice. "Coming, honey." I continued up the stairs, more certain than ever that words wouldn't change anything. Only actions would. On Saturday, I visited my mother's best friend, Lauren Hayes. She'd remained in my life after Mom died, though her visits had become less frequent after Diane made it clear she wasn't particularly welcome in our new home. "This is a surprise," Lauren said, hugging me tightly. "A wonderful one." Lauren had built a successful graphic design business and had always been the coolest adult I knew. Her apartment was filled with art and books, and she never treated me like a child. "I need your help," I told her, settling into her colorful living room. "I want to learn about the advertising business. The real business, not just what they teach in school." Lauren's eyebrows rose. "Does your dad know you're here?" "Dad doesn't know much about my life anymore," I replied, the words coming out more bitter than I intended. She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Tell me what's going on, Cassidy. The full story." So I did. About the family portrait, the succession plans, the slow erasure of my place in both the family and, potentially, the company. Lauren listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled as I continued. "That doesn't sound like the James Mitchell I knew," she said finally. "He's different now. Or maybe I'm seeing who he really is." I shrugged, trying to sound more indifferent than I felt. "So what exactly do you want to do about it?" "I want to understand the business well enough to claim my place in it, whether Dad and Diane want me there or not." Lauren's smile was slow and approving. "Now that sounds like your mother talking." She reached for her laptop. "Let's start with the basics. And Cassidy, this stays between us." For the next 4 hours, Lauren gave me a crash course in advertising fundamentals, sharing insider knowledge about industry trends, client relationships, and creative strategy. She showed me campaigns she'd worked on, explaining the psychology behind effective advertising and the business acumen required to succeed. Before I left, she handed me a business card. "My friend Rachel owns a small agency across town. She's looking for a part-time assistant. The pay isn't much, but the experience would be invaluable." "Diane would never let me take a job," I said, reality crashing back in. "She thinks dance is already too distracting from schoolwork." "The position is virtual," Lauren replied with a wink. 10 hours a week, mostly on your own schedule. What Diane doesn't know won't hurt her." 2 days later, I had my first job in advertising. While Trevor and Mason played video games and Diane orchestrated their futures at Mitchell Media, I was learning the business from the ground up, working remotely for a small but innovative agency specializing in digital media. I created a separate email account and used my dance practices as cover for the hours I spent working and learning. Every weekday after school, I would go to the library, claiming to study, while actually completing tasks for Rachel's agency. I built my knowledge methodically: social media analytics, client communication, basic design principles. Each skill a building block for my future. The strangest part was how alive I felt. For the first time since Diane had entered our lives, I wasn't just reacting to circumstances. I was creating my own path. The hurt of exclusion was still there, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it fueled my determination. 3 months into my secret apprenticeship, Rachel gave me my first solo project, creating a social media strategy for a local dance studio's summer program. The connection to my personal passion wasn't lost on me. "You have a natural talent for this," Rachel told me during our weekly check-in call. "You understand audience connection in a way many seasoned professionals don't." That night, I opened my laptop and found an email from Wallace Communications. They wanted me to interview for their competitive summer internship program. As I stared at the screen, a text from Dad appeared. "Family dinner tomorrow night at Riverside Grill to celebrate Trevor's acceptance to Penn State Business School. Diane says wear something nice for photos." I looked between the email and the text message, the contrast striking. In one world, I was valued for my mind and abilities. In the other, I was an afterthought, expected to smile for photos celebrating someone else's achievements. My response was simple: "I'll be there." But this time, I would be arriving with a strategy, not just hurt feelings. The Riverside Grill was exactly the kind of upscale restaurant Diane preferred, all crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths. As we were escorted to our table, I noticed several of Dad's business associates dining nearby. This wasn't just a family dinner. It was a strategic networking event disguised as a celebration. "Smile, everyone," Diane instructed as we sat down, her voice honey-sweet. "The Andersons just walked in, and they're potential investors." Trevor straightened his shoulders importantly, while Mason reluctantly put his phone away. Dad, looking distinguished in his tailored suit, nodded automatically at Diane's directive. I observed them all with new eyes, seeing not just my family, but players in a business strategy I was only beginning to understand. "Cassidy, darling," Diane said, her attention turning to me with practiced precision. "I've been meaning to ask, how is that dance thing going? Do you think you'll continue it in college, as a hobby?" The dismissive phrasing was deliberate, designed to minimize in front of witnesses. 3 months ago, I might have flinched or stammered. Instead, I smiled calmly. "Actually, I've been thinking about business pathways that combine creative and analytical skills. The advertising world seems particularly interesting." The momentary flash of alarm in Diane's eyes was worth every second of my preparation. "Advertising?" Dad perked up, looking at me directly for what felt like the first time in months. "You're interested in advertising?" "The industry is evolving so quickly," I continued, my voice steady, "especially with influencer marketing and targeted social media campaigns. The old models are becoming obsolete." Trevor snorted. "Since when do you know anything about marketing models?" I turned to him with a pleasant smile. "I read. You should try it sometime." Dad unsuccessfully tried to hide a smirk while Diane quickly intervened. "Let's focus on celebrating Trevor tonight. Penn State's business program is highly selective." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Congratulations, Trevor. Though I was surprised you didn't consider Washington State. Their digital marketing specialization is getting national attention." The comment wasn't random. I knew from my research that Mitchell Media was struggling to adapt to digital marketing trends, something reflected in their recent quarterly reports, which were publicly available for the company since its acquisition of outside investors 2 years ago. Dad's eyebrows rose slightly. "Washington State's program has that kind of reputation now?" Their graduates are being recruited by the top agencies, I replied, casually sipping my water. Lauren Hayes mentioned it when I saw her last month. Lauren? Dad's voice carried a note of surprise. You've been seeing Lauren? We meet for lunch sometimes. She's been helpful with some research I've been doing. Diane's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her water glass. Lauren Hayes always was a bit unconventional. I'm not sure she's the best influence. She was Mom's best friend, I interrupted, my tone still pleasant but firm. And she's one of the most respected graphic designers in Portland. Dad looked genuinely torn, caught between his current wife and memories of a past he'd been encouraged to forget. Lauren is talented, he acknowledged quietly. The waiter arrived to take our orders, temporarily diffusing the tension. As the evening progressed, I carefully gathered information, noting how Diane steered conversations toward Trevor and Mason's involvement in the business, how she subtly reminded Dad of their contributions while dismissing my potential input. More importantly, I observed Dad's reactions. The slight furrow of his brow when Diane interrupted me, the way his eyes lingered on me with something like regret when he thought I wasn't looking, the hesitant pride when I made an insightful comment about advertising trends. My father wasn't the villain in this story, I realized. He was a man who had lost his way, gradually surrendering his authority both at home and potentially at work. After dinner, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, Mr. Anderson, the potential investor Diane had pointed out, approached our group. James Mitchell. Thought that was you. How's that rebranding campaign coming along? My board is eager to see the direction. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We're exploring several concepts. Should have something to present next week. Make it innovative, Anderson said firmly. The last presentation was a bit conventional for our taste. We're looking for something that connects with younger demographics. Diane jumped in smoothly. Trevor has been developing some exciting concepts, haven't you, Trevor? Trevor caught off guard, mumbled something about synergy and market penetration. Buzzwords without substance. An idea formed in my mind, bold and possibly reckless. Mr. Anderson, I said, extending my hand. I'm Cassidy Parker Mitchell, James's daughter. I actually had some thoughts about your company's positioning that might interest you. The look of horror on Diane's face was matched only by the surprise on Dad's. Cassidy, Dad began, but Anderson was already turning to me with interest. Is that so? Always good to hear a young person's perspective. You work at Mitchell Media too? Not officially, I replied with a smile. But I've grown up in the business. I'd be happy to email you some preliminary concepts, just as food for thought, of course. Bold, Anderson said approvingly, handing me his business card. I like that. James, you didn't tell me your daughter was following in your footsteps. The drive home was charged with tension. Diane waited until we pulled into the driveway before turning to face me in the back seat. What exactly do you think you're doing? She asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. Networking, I replied innocently. Isn't that what these family dinners are really about? You can't just approach potential clients and make promises the company can't keep. I didn't promise anything, I said calmly. I offered to share ideas. Ideas Mitchell Media desperately needs, based on Mr. Anderson's comments. Dad, still behind the wheel, hadn't moved. Cass, honey, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but Diane's right. We have established processes for client relationships. Processes that aren't working, I pointed out. Your last presentation was conventional, according to the client himself. That's enough, Diane snapped. You're a high school student with no professional experience. This is exactly why family and business need clear boundaries. Like excluding family members from business decisions based on personal preferences? I asked, my voice still even. Or scheduling important family photos when certain members can't. Attend? The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I'd directly acknowledged what she'd done. Dad turned in his seat, looking confused. What do you mean, Cassidy? What photos? The family portrait in your office, I said quietly. Taken the weekend of my dance competition. The one where I don't exist. His face paled. I thought... Diane said you didn't want to be in it, that you were focused on dance and didn't care about the company image. I met Diane's eyes in the rearview mirror, seeing the calculation there. Is that what she told you? That's not... Diane began, but Dad interrupted her. Is that true, Diane? Did Cassidy actually say that? When Diane didn't immediately respond, I opened my car door. I have homework to finish. Congratulations again, Trevor. That night, I composed an email to Mr. Anderson with some initial thoughts on his company's positioning, drawing on everything I'd learned from Lauren, Rachel, and my own research. I was careful not to overstep, presenting my ideas as conversation starters rather than formal proposals. At 11:30 p.m., a soft knock came on my bedroom door. Dad stood there, looking uncertain and somehow older than he had that morning. Can we talk for a minute, Cass? I gestured to my desk chair while I sat cross-legged on my bed. Did you really want to be in that family portrait? He asked without preamble. Of course I did, Dad. I've always wanted to be part of your life, all aspects of it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from my childhood that it made my throat tighten. I don't know what happened. Diane said you told her you'd rather focus on dance, that you weren't interested in being part of the company's legacy. And you believed that without asking me? The question hung between us, heavy with all it implied about the distance that had grown between us. I've made mistakes, he said finally. Big ones, it seems. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I'd heard in years, but it wasn't enough, not after everything. I'm interested in advertising, Dad. I always have been. I grew up watching you build Mitchell Media from nothing. That didn't change. Because Diane and her sons entered the picture. Dad nodded slowly. I noticed tonight. You've done your homework on the industry. More than homework, I admitted. I've been working part-time for a small agency, learning the business from the ground up. His eyebrows shot up. You have a job? Since when? 3 months ago, and I've applied for the Wallace Communications Summer Internship Program. Wallace? Our competitor? The surprise in his voice was tinged with something else. Respect, maybe, or concern that I was slipping away. They have an excellent program for high school students. Mitchell Media doesn't offer anything similar. Dad was quiet for a long moment, his eyes taking in my room. The dance trophies, yes, but also the marketing books stacked on my desk, the industry publications I'd subscribed to. I've missed a lot, he said finally. Yes, I agreed, not offering absolution he hadn't yet earned. You have. He stood, hesitating before reaching the door. That email you sent to Anderson, I'd like to see it if you're willing to share. I nodded, feeling the first tentative bridge being extended between us. I'll forward it to you. Good night, Cass, he said softly. Good night, Dad. After he left, I sent him the email, along with a separate message. This is just the beginning of what I can contribute. All I've ever wanted is a chance to prove it. The next morning, I received 2 important emails before breakfast. The first was from Mr. Anderson, enthusiastically responding to my ideas and requesting a meeting to discuss them further, copying Dad on his response. The second was from Wallace Communications, confirming my interview for the internship program. As I headed downstairs, I could hear Diane and Dad in the kitchen, their voices tense but hushed. I paused on the stairs, unashamed to eavesdrop on a conversation I suspected was about me. She's been manipulating this situation, Diane was saying. Going behind our backs to approach clients, working for some agency without permission. Our permission? Dad's voice was sharper than I'd heard it in years. She's my daughter, Diane. And from what I can tell, she's shown remarkable initiative and talent. She's trying to insert herself into Mitchell Media after showing no interest for years. That's not true, and I think you know it, Dad replied quietly. The question is why you felt the need to keep her at a distance in the first place. Their voices dropped lower, and I continued downstairs, my mind racing. For the first time in years, Dad was questioning Diane's narrative about me. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a crack in the foundation of her influence. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "How about lunch today? I have some interesting news to share." I responded immediately. "Absolutely. 12:30 at Jasper's Cafe?" The pieces of my support network were coming together, and with them, a strategy more sophisticated than Diane had anticipated from the stepdaughter she'd so carelessly dismissed. Jasper's Cafe was bustling with the lunch crowd when I arrived, but I spotted Lauren immediately at a corner table, her vibrant red hair impossible to miss. She waved me over with a smile that suggested she was harboring an exciting secret. "You look different," she remarked as I slid into the seat across from her. More confident. "Things are starting to shift," I admitted, filling her in on the previous night's events. The dinner, the conversation with Mr. Anderson, and most significantly, the late-night talk with my father. "It's the first real conversation we've had in years." Lauren nodded, her expression thoughtful. "James was always a good man, just susceptible to strong personalities. Your mother was his anchor in many ways." "And now Diane is," I said, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Perhaps. But anchors can be lifted when the ship changes course." Lauren's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Which brings me to my news. You remember I mentioned Rachel's agency works with several mid-sized local businesses?" I nodded, curious where this was heading. "One of her clients is Westlake Development Group. Thomas Westlake sits on the board of directors for Wallace Communications," I finished, the connection clicking into place. "That's how you knew about their internship program." "Precisely. And Thomas happens to be an old friend who owes me a favor or two." Lauren leaned forward. "Your application impressed them, Cassidy. But I may have also put in a good word, mentioning that you're James Mitchell's daughter, the same James Mitchell whose innovative campaigns built Mitchell Media's reputation before the recent conservative turn." I processed this information carefully. "You're saying they're interested in me partly because of Dad's early work?" "I'm saying they recognize talent when they see it. But they're also not blind to the potential competitive advantage of having Mitchell's daughter in their ranks." The realization was both flattering and slightly uncomfortable. "They want to use me to get to Dad's clients?" Lauren shook her head firmly. "Not exactly. They want the fresh perspective you bring, the same creative insight that made your father successful before Mitchell Media became so corporate," I supplied. "Boring? Predictable?" "Your words, not mine," Lauren said with a laugh. "But yes, essentially. Wallace Communications has been watching Mitchell Media's declining creative output with interest. They believe the company has lost its innovative edge since the restructuring 2 years ago. The restructuring that had coincided with Diane's increasing influence. This wasn't just about my place in the family. Something larger was happening at Mitchell Media itself. "There's more," Lauren continued, pulling out her tablet. "I did some digging into Mitchell Media's public filings. Take a look." She slid the tablet across the table, displaying a financial report I hadn't seen before. As I scanned the document, certain patterns jumped out immediately. Declining revenues in the creative services division, increased dependence on a few major clients rather than a diverse portfolio, and most concerning, a substantial loan secured against the company's assets. "This doesn't make sense," I said, frowning at the figures. "Dad always emphasized client diversity and minimal debt. These decisions go against everything he built the company on." "These decisions," Lauren said pointedly, "started approximately 18 months ago, right around the time Diane Adams Mitchell was named Chief Financial Officer." My stomach tightened. "She's deliberately changing the company's direction? Why would she risk its stability?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Lauren retrieved her tablet, her expression serious. "I'm not suggesting anything nefarious, but these strategic shifts benefit certain stakeholders more than others, particularly if someone were positioning for a potential sale or merger. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think Diane is setting up Mitchell Media to be sold? I think, Lauren replied carefully, that you should look very closely at who stands to benefit most from the company's current trajectory, and perhaps why there's been such an effort to minimize your involvement in the business. My mind raced through the possibilities. If Mitchell Media were sold, Dad would likely receive a substantial payout as the founder and majority shareholder. But he'd lose the company he'd built from nothing, the legacy he'd always talked about. Passing down, a legacy that Diane was now positioning for Trevor and Mason, not me. Dad wouldn't sell, I said with certainty. The company is his life's work. Is he making all the decisions these days? Lauren asked gently. The question lingered between us, uncomfortable but impossible to dismiss. Over the past 3 years, how many of Dad's decisions had actually been Diane's? Lauren reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Information is power, Cassidy. Now you need to decide how to use it. After lunch, instead of returning to school for my afternoon classes, I made an impulsive decision. I took the bus downtown to the Mitchell Media offices. I hadn't been there in over a year, not since Diane had suggested that my visits distracted the staff from their work. The receptionist, Angela, who'd known me since I was in pigtails, broke into a wide smile when I walked in. Cassidy Parker! What a wonderful surprise! It's good to see you too, Angela, I said, returning her warm hug. Is my dad in? He's in a meeting, but they should be wrapping up soon. You want to wait in his office? I nodded, grateful for her casual acceptance of my presence. As she led me through the open workspace, I noticed subtle changes since my last visit. The colorful concept boards that once lined the walls had been replaced with more corporate-looking displays. The creative teams area, once buzzing with energetic collaboration, now consisted of orderly cubicles where designers worked quietly in isolation. Place has changed a bit, Angela remarked, noticing my observations. Lots more structure these days. I can see that, I murmured. Is everyone happy with the new direction? Angela's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Change is always an adjustment, she said diplomatically. Here we are. Make yourself comfortable, and I'll let your dad know you're here when he's free. Dad's office had changed too. The eclectic collection of client mementos and industry awards had been reorganized into a more austere display. The comfortable visitor chairs had been replaced with sleek but less inviting modern pieces. And there, behind his desk, hung the family portrait that excluded me, Diane, Trevor, Mason, and Dad smiling as if nothing was missing. I walked around the office slowly, taking in the details. On his desk sat several folders marked confidential, one of which was partially open. Normally, I would have respected his privacy, but Lauren's concerns echoed in my mind. I glanced toward the door to ensure I was still alone, then carefully lifted the folder's cover. Inside was a document titled Preliminary Acquisition Proposal, North Star Media Group. My heart pounded as I quickly scanned the contents. The proposal outlined terms for North Star's acquisition of Mitchell Media, with specific provisions for executive retention, asset valuation, and, most tellingly, a substantial advisory fee to be paid to Diane Adams Mitchell for facilitating the transaction. I heard voices approaching in the hallway and quickly closed the folder, moving away from the desk. Through the glass wall of the office, I could see Dad speaking with 2 men in expensive suits, Diane at his side, her hand proprietarily on his arm. When Dad noticed me through the glass, surprise registered on his face, quickly followed by what looked like genuine pleasure. He excused himself from the group and entered the office, closing the door behind him. Cassidy, this is unexpected. He embraced me briefly, the gesture slightly awkward but sincere. I thought we could grab coffee, I said, trying to sound casual, despite the document I'd just discovered. But I see you're busy with potential buyers? The slight flinch told me my guess had hit home. Those are business associates, he said carefully. North Star Media is a potential partner we're exploring opportunities with. Partner or purchaser? I asked directly. Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. What have you heard? I saw the proposal on your desk, I admitted. It looks more like an acquisition than a partnership. You shouldn't be looking at confidential documents, he said, though without real anger. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated, Cass. The industry is changing, and sometimes consolidation is the most strategic move. Is that what you believe, or what Diane has convinced you to believe? The office door opened before he could respond, Diane entering with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Cassidy, what a surprise. Shouldn't you be in school? Study. Hall, period. I lied smoothly. I thought I'd surprise Dad with coffee, but I see he's in meetings. Important meetings, Diane emphasized. We're discussing the future direction of Mitchell Media. So I gathered, I replied, meeting her gaze directly. The North Star acquisition must be a big decision. Diane's smile froze as her eyes darted to the folder on Dad's desk, then back to me. These are complex business matters that don't concern a high school student. They concern a daughter whose family legacy is being sold out from under her, I countered. Dad stepped between us, his expression troubled. No decisions have been made, Cassidy. We're exploring options, that's all. Options that include a special advisory fee for Diane? I challenged, watching his face carefully. Did you know about that particular clause, Dad? The momentary confusion in his eyes was answered enough. He turned to Diane. What advisory fee? Diane recovered quickly, her tone shifting to one of practiced patience. It's standard practice, James, for the CFO who structures the deal. Nothing unusual. It's unusual if the CFO is also the founder's wife, pushing for a sale that transforms a family legacy into a personal payday, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That's enough, Diane snapped, her mask of civility slipping. You have no understanding of business realities. Mitchell Media needs strategic direction that your father's outdated approach can't provide. Dad's head swiveled between us, clearly struggling to process this confrontation and the revelations behind it. Wait, Diane, what exactly? Mr. Mitchell? Angela's voice came through the intercom. The North Star representatives are asking if you'll be rejoining the meeting. Diane seized the interruption. We'll be right there, Angela. She turned to me, her voice low. You should go, Cassidy. Your father has important decisions to make without emotional interference. I looked at Dad, searching for some sign that he recognized the manipulation happening right in front of him. His expression was conflicted, torn between his business obligations and the dawning realization that something wasn't right. We'll talk later, Cass, he promised. Tonight, okay? I nodded, gathering my bag. Sure, Dad. Tonight. As I passed Diane, I added quietly, I know what you're doing. And I'm not the only one. Her perfectly composed expression flickered just slightly, enough to confirm that my discovery had rattled her. As I left the office, I heard her already, redirecting Dad's attention back to the North Star meeting, her voice smooth and persuasive. Walking through the creative department on my way out, I noticed a young designer working on what appeared to be concepts for the Anderson account. The same client who had expressed dissatisfaction with Mitchell Media's conventional approach. I paused by his desk. Those are for Anderson properties? He glanced up, surprised. Yeah, not that it matters. Whatever we create, the final presentation will be watered down to match the Mitchell Media brand standards. The air quotes and eye roll made his frustration clear. What if it didn't have to be? I asked. What if you could present something truly innovative? He laughed without humor. Then I'd be working at a different agency. Management doesn't take risks anymore. I pulled out my phone, opening the email I'd sent Mr. Anderson with my conceptual ideas. Take a look at these. Anderson already expressed interest in this direction. The designer, Jason, according to his nameplate, scrolled through my ideas, his eyebrows rising. This is actually really good. Fresh perspective, but still strategically sound. Who came up with this? I did, I said simply. I'm Cassidy Parker, James Mitchell's daughter. Recognition dawned on his face. Oh, I've heard about you. Didn't realize you were involved with the company. I'm not, officially, but maybe that's about to change. As I left Mitchell Media that afternoon, pieces of a larger puzzle were falling into place. This wasn't just about my exclusion from a family portrait or Diane's attempts to erase me from Dad's life. It was about the systematic dismantling of everything my father had built, his creative legacy, his business philosophy, and ultimately, his control over his own company. The question now was how to stop it before it was too late. That evening, I sat in my bedroom reviewing everything I'd learned. The acquisition proposal from North Star, Diane's secret advisory fee, the declining creative quality at Mitchell Media, and the strategic shift away from the company's core values, all of it painted a disturbing picture. Diane wasn't just pushing me away from the family. She was systematically dismantling my father's life's work. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Any updates after our talk? I replied quickly. Found acquisition proposal from North Star Media. Diane gets a special fee for facilitating. Dad seems partly in the dark. Her response came seconds later. Not surprised. Dinner tomorrow? I have someone you should meet. Before I could respond, there was a soft knock at my door. Dad stood there looking tired but determined. Can we talk now, Cass? I nodded, putting my phone aside. He sat at my desk chair while I remained on the edge of my bed, the distance between us filled with 3 years of accumulated silence. I spoke with Diane about what you said, he began carefully. She explained that the advisory fee is standard, practice in acquisitions. Did she explain why she didn't tell you about it up front? I countered. Or why is she pushing to sell the company you built from nothing? Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. Mitchell Media is struggling, Cassidy. The market has changed. Digital disruption, social media dynamics. We're not adapting quickly enough. That's because Diane has systematically pushed out your best creative talent and replaced them with people who won't challenge her, I said bluntly. Did you know the design team is having their work constantly watered down to match brand standards? That are killing any innovation? His head snapped up. Who told you that? I spoke with Jason in the creative department today. The whole team is frustrated. That's why your presentations to clients like Anderson are being called conventional and outdated. Dad was silent for a long moment, processing this information. The North Star deal isn't finalized, he said finally. It's just an option we're exploring. An option where Diane gets a special payout, Trevor gets positioned for executive training, and your company gets absorbed into a corporate conglomerate, I pointed out. What exactly do you get, Dad, besides watching everything you built disappear? Financial. Security, he replied, but without conviction. A clean transition into retirement. I stared at him incredulously. Retirement? You're 48. You love building campaigns, connecting with clients, seeing your creative vision come to life. When did you start thinking about stepping away from all that? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Dad's gaze dropped to his hands. I don't know, he admitted quietly. And in those 3 words, I heard the first real acknowledgement of how much he'd lost track of himself. I softened my tone. Remember when Anderson, Parker and Son went corporate? You told me they'd sacrificed their soul for a bigger market share. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. I did say that, didn't I? You said Mitchell Media would never make that trade. That building something authentic and lasting was more important than quick profits. Dad looked up, something awakening in his eyes. I meant it when I said it. I know you did, I replied gently. That's the dad I remember. The one who taught me that creativity and integrity matter more than playing it safe. He stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of my bedroom. Things are complicated now, Cassidy. There are more people involved, more considerations, like Diane's career ambitions, or keeping Trevor and Mason in the lifestyle they're accustomed to. The words came out sharper than I intended. Dad stopped pacing, his expression pained. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Dad. Not to you, not to the company you built, and definitely not to me. I took a deep breath. Did you know Diane deliberately scheduled that family portrait for the weekend of my dance competition? That she told you I didn't want to be included when I never said anything of the sort? He stared at me, shock evident on his face. What? She's been systematically pushing me out of your life for years, convincing you I'm not interested in the business, that I'm too focused on dance, that I don't fit the Mitchell media image. My voice remained steady even as I laid out the painful truth. And you believed her without ever asking me directly. Dad sank back into the chair, the weight of this revelation visibly landing on his shoulders. Cassidy, I wouldn't have, but you did, I said simply. And now she's doing the same thing with your company, isolating you from information, convincing you that selling out is the only option, making decisions that benefit her agenda rather than your legacy. The parallels were impossible to ignore, and I could see them registering in my father's expression. The dawning horror of recognizing a pattern he'd been blind to for years. The bedroom door swung open without warning. Diane stood there, her carefully composed face tight with anger. James, we need to discuss the North Star meeting, privately. The interruption was so typical of her tactics that I almost laughed. Of course she'd been listening, waiting for the perfect moment to derail our conversation. Dad didn't move from his seat. We're talking, Diane. I'll be down later. Her eyes widened slightly at his resistance. The discussion with North Star is time-sensitive. They need our response by tomorrow morning. Then they can wait until tomorrow morning, Dad replied firmly. This conversation with my daughter is more important right now. The shock on Diane's face mirrored what I felt. This was the first time in years I'd seen Dad directly contradict her. She recovered quickly, her expression softening into practiced concern. James, I know you're upset about some misunderstandings. Cassidy has, but making business decisions while emotional isn't wise. North Star won't wait forever, and this opportunity is too important to jeopardize over teenage drama. The dismissive framing was classic Diane, minimizing my concerns. While positioning herself as the rational adult in the room, I waited for Dad to cave as he always had before. Instead, he stood, his voice quiet but firm. The only thing I'm jeopardizing right now is this conversation with Cassidy. Everything else can wait. Diane's mask slipped, just for a second, revealing the cold calculation beneath. I see. Well, when you're ready to discuss the actual future of our family business, I'll be in the study. She pulled the door closed with controlled force as she left. Dad turned back to me, something resolute in his expression. I need to know everything, Cassidy. Not your interpretation or Diane's, but facts. When did this start? What exactly has been happening at Mitchell Media that I haven't seen? For the next hour, I methodically laid out everything I'd observed and learned, from the family dynamics to the business decisions, from Diane's subtle manipulations to the concrete evidence of the company's changing direction. I showed him the research I'd been doing, the industry trends I'd been tracking, even my freelance work with Rachel's agency. You've been doing all this while maintaining your grades and dancing? He asked, with genuine amazement in his voice. I wanted to understand the business from the ground up, I explained. Not just Mitchell Media specifically, but the industry as a whole, how it's changing, where the opportunities are. Dad was quiet for a long moment. I've underestimated you, Cass. Badly. The simple acknowledgement meant more than any elaborate apology could have. Yes, I agreed. You have. So what now? He asked, and the question surprised me. My father, the successful business owner, asking his high school daughter for directions. First, you need to review the North Star proposal with fresh eyes, and preferably with an advisor Diane doesn't. Influence. Look carefully at what you'd be giving up versus what you'd be gaining. He nodded slowly. And, second, talk to your creative team directly, without Diane present. Find out what's really happening with client work, why innovative concepts are being diluted, how the company culture has changed. What else? I hesitated before saying the hardest part. You need to decide if Diane's vision for Mitchell Media and for our family aligns with yours. Because right now, she's steering both in directions you never wanted to go. Dad ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache for simpler times. When did you get so wise, Cassidy? I've had a lot of time to observe. From the sidelines, I replied without bitterness. Sometimes you see patterns more clearly when you're not in the middle of them. He stood, hesitating before awkwardly pulling me into a hug that felt both foreign and desperately familiar. I've missed you, Cass, more than I realized until right now. I allowed myself to relax into the embrace, just for a moment. I've missed you too, Dad. After he left, I texted Lauren. Dinner tomorrow sounds good. Things are moving faster than expected. Dad finally sees through Diane's manipulation. Her reply came quickly. Excellent. 7 p.m. at my place. Bringing someone from Wallace Communications. Get ready for your interview. I stared at the message, a plan forming in my mind. If Mitchell Media was at a crossroads, perhaps there was a third path forward. One neither Diane nor North Star had considered. But I'd need allies, evidence, and perfect timing. The next morning, at breakfast, the tension was palpable. Diane maintained a frigid silence while Trevor and Mason exchanged confused glances, sensing the shift in family dynamics without understanding its cause. Dad, for his part, seemed more alert than I'd seen him in years, watching Diane with new awareness. I'll be late tonight, I announced, spreading jam on my toast. Dinner with Lauren Hayes. On a school night? Diane questioned, her tone suggesting disapproval. She's introducing me to someone from Wallace Communications for my internship interview. Dad looked up from his coffee. The interview is confirmed then? I nodded. Tomorrow afternoon. Well done, Cass. The simple praise from my father made Diane's eyes narrow dangerously. You're encouraging this? She asked him. Our competition? I'm encouraging my daughter's interest in the industry, Dad replied evenly. Mitchell Media doesn't offer internships for students her age. Wallace does. Seems straightforward. The matter-of-fact support left Diane momentarily speechless. Trevor, never particularly intuitive, broke the awkward silence. So you're like, going to work for the enemy? I smiled pleasantly. I'm exploring opportunities to learn about advertising from multiple perspectives. Isn't that what you're doing at Penn State? Broadening your horizons? Before he could respond, Dad stood. Cassidy, would you like a ride to school? I'm heading downtown early for some meetings. Sure, I agreed, recognizing the opportunity for uninterrupted conversation away from Diane's vigilance. As we pulled out of the driveway, I noticed Diane watching from the front window, her expression calculating. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. The confrontation had only just begun. The drive to school with Dad gave us valuable time to strategize without Diane's watchful presence. I reviewed the North Star proposal again last night, Dad said as we navigated morning. Traffic. Really reviewed it, not just skimmed the executive summary Diane prepared. And? I prompted. It's worse than I thought. The terms heavily favor their executives taking control of creative direction immediately. Most of our team would be evaluated for redundancies, corporate speak for mass layoffs. My stomach tightened. What about you? I'd have a ceremonial role as founder emeritus for 18 months, then a full exit. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. They'd keep the Mitchell Media name for 2 years before complete absorption into North Star's brand. The reality was even more devastating than I'd feared. And Diane knew all this? Not only knew it, she negotiated these terms directly with their CFO. There are email exchanges I hadn't seen before. His voice carried an edge of controlled anger I'd rarely heard. They've been discussing this for months while I was focused on client work. What about Trevor's position? He'd get fast-tracked into their management training program. Guaranteed placement regardless of qualifications. The pieces were falling into place with disturbing clarity. So Diane secures her financial future. Through the advisory fee, positions Trevor at North Star, and you get a ceremonial title before being pushed out completely. Dad nodded grimly. That about sums it up. What are you going to do? He was quiet for a moment, carefully considering his words. I've called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. As founder, I still hold majority voting shares, though some are in a trust Diane helps manage. This was a critical detail I hadn't known. How much control does she have over your shares? The trust holds 30% of my shares. I directly control 40%, and the remaining 30% is distributed among minor investors and key employees. I did the quick math. So you need the trust shares to maintain majority control? Yes. Without them, I could be outvoted if Diane convinces the minor shareholders to back the North Star deal. As we pulled up to my school, I turned to face him directly. Who are the trustees besides Diane? My old friend Scott Wilson and my attorney Patricia Reeves. Relief washed over me. So Diane isn't the only decision-maker for the trust? No. Major decisions require majority agreement among trustees. Dad's expression shifted as understanding dawned. If I can convince Scott and Patricia that the North Star deal isn't in the company's best interest. Exactly, I confirmed. You need to talk to them before the board meeting. And Dad, you should bring evidence of how Diane has been making decisions without fully informing you. He nodded, a new determination in his eyes. I've already started compiling it. He hesitated, then added, Thank you, Cassidy, for waking me up before it was too late. As I gathered my backpack, a thought occurred to me. Those minor shareholders, the ones who hold that 30%, who are they exactly? Mostly early employees and a few angel investors who believed in us when we were starting out. Why? Because they invested in your vision for Mitchell Media, not Diane's exit strategy. They might be crucial allies. Dad's face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. You really do think like an advertising strategist, always identifying the key audience. I shrugged, but his recognition warmed me. I learned from the best. Throughout my morning classes, I found it nearly impossible to concentrate. The situation at Mitchell Media was accelerating faster than I'd anticipated. I texted Lauren during lunch. Still on for dinner tonight. Things move quickly. Dad discovered Diane negotiated terrible terms with North Star. Her reply came immediately. Definitely still on. My contact from Wallace will be there. Also, check your email. Send something you should see. I ducked into the library and opened my email. Lauren had forwarded an industry newsletter with the subject line, Executive Movements. I scrolled through until a familiar name jumped out. North Star Media Group announces Bradley Winters as new Chief Strategy Officer. Winters, previously with Adams Financial Consulting, brings experience in mergers and acquisitions with a focus on media properties. Adams Financial Consulting, Diane's former company before she married Dad. Bradley Winters had been her colleague. I remembered him from early family dinners when Diane was still trying to ingratiate herself. This couldn't be a coincidence. Diane wasn't just facilitating a deal with North Star. She had a direct connection to their executive team. I forwarded the newsletter to Dad with a short message. You should know about this connection before the board meeting. By the time the final bell rang, my nerves were stretched thin with anticipation. I'd received a brief text from Dad. Board meeting in progress. We'll update later. Instead of heading home, I went directly to Lauren's apartment, arriving 2 hours before our scheduled dinner. She answered the door in paint-splattered jeans, her red hair pulled into a messy bun. "You're early," she observed, stepping aside to let me in. I couldn't go home, I admitted. Too much tension with Diane, and I don't want her overhearing any of our plans. Lauren nodded in understanding. You made a wise choice. Robert from Wallace isn't arriving until 7, but we can use this time to prepare. How exactly? She grinned, leading me into her home office where a large whiteboard was covered with notes and diagrams. I've been thinking about your situation from a strategic perspective. If Mitchell Media is at a crossroads, we need to be ready with an alternative path forward, one that doesn't involve North Star swallowing the company whole. I stared at the detailed analysis she'd mapped out, company valuation estimates, market positioning considerations, potential restructuring options. You've been working on this for me? I asked, genuinely touched by her investment in my situation, for your father, and frankly, for what Mitchell Media represents in this market. James built something special before Diane started dismantling it. The industry needs companies with authentic creative vision, not just corporate conglomerates, chasing quarterly numbers. For the next hour, Lauren and I refined what she called the restoration plan, a comprehensive strategy to revitalize Mitchell Media by returning to its creative roots while incorporating modern digital approaches. We were deep in discussion when my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. How did the board meeting go? I asked immediately. His voice was tight with controlled emotion. It was illuminating. Diane didn't expect me to come prepared with the full North Star contract details, or to have spoken with Scott and Patricia beforehand. And? The board has tabled the North Star, discussion pending a more complete analysis of alternatives. I've been authorized to explore other strategic options before making any decisions about the company's future. Relief washed over me. That's fantastic, Dad. It's a start, he cautioned. Diane is furious, of course. Called an impromptu meeting with Trevor, Mason, and her attorney after the board dispersed. Her attorney? Not the company's attorney? Exactly. His voice lowered. Cassidy, there's something else you should know. I had our IT director check Diane's company email after I saw that newsletter you sent. She's been in regular contact with Bradley Winters for months, discussing not just the Mitchell Media acquisition, but her future role at North Star after the deal closes. The confirmation of her betrayal was still shocking despite all the evidence we'd already gathered. She was planning to join them? As a senior VP of finance with a substantial compensation package. The emails make it clear this has been in motion since before she began pushing for the sale. I processed this information, its implications rippling through every interaction I'd observed. Dad, this goes beyond bad business judgment. She's been intentionally working against the company's interests while serving as CFO. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. The silence on the line suggested he'd reached the same conclusion. Patricia is reviewing the legal options. In the meantime, I've called an emergency executive session for tomorrow morning to address the conflict of interest. Diane doesn't know about the emails? Not yet. She knows something's changed, but not the extent of what I've discovered. His voice carried a note of weariness I could understand. Learning your spouse has been systematically undermining both your business and family isn't easy to absorb. Where are you now? I asked. At the office. I'll be here late reviewing documents with Patricia. It's probably better if I don't come home tonight. The situation was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. Dad, If you're not coming home, I don't think I should either. Diane's going to be looking for someone to blame, and I'm an easy target. He was quiet for a moment, the implications settling. You're right. Where will you stay? I'm at Lauren's now. I can stay here tonight. I glanced at Lauren, who nodded immediate agreement. Good. I'll call you in the morning after the executive session. And Cassidy? Be careful. Diane won't take this challenge to her plans lightly. After we hung up, I filled Lauren in on the developments. Her expression grew increasingly serious as I relayed the extent of Diane's deception. This is no longer just about family dynamics or even company strategy, she observed. Your father is dealing with potential corporate malfeasance. The legal and financial implications could be significant. I sank onto her sofa, suddenly overwhelmed by the escalating situation. I just wanted to secure my place in the family and the company. I never imagined it would uncover something this serious. Lauren sat beside me, her expression gentle but firm. When you start pulling on loose threads, you never know what might unravel. But remember, this isn't your doing. Diane created this situation with her actions. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. Where are you? Mom is freaking out. Says, Dad's trying to ruin everything. I showed Lauren the message. What do I tell him? Nothing substantive, she advised. Trevor's loyalty is to his mother, understandably. Anything you say could get back to Diane. I typed a careful response. Staying at a friend's tonight to study for exams. What's going on? His reply came quickly. Mom won't say exactly. Something about Dad blocking an important business deal because of you. The blame was already being shifted my way, exactly as I'd feared. Before I could respond, another text arrived, this one from Mason, whose messages were typically rare. Cass, whatever's happening with the parents is intense. Mom's calling her attorney and packing stuff in boxes. Are you okay? This was unexpected. Mason, reaching out with what seemed like genuine concern rather than accusation. I replied honestly, I'm okay. Staying with a friend tonight. Are you all right? Confused, he texted back. Dad called, said he's not coming home, told me and Trev not to let Mom take anything from his office. Weird vibes. The situation at home was deteriorating rapidly. I looked up at Lauren, anxiety tightening my chest. Diane's packing things. She might be removing documents or evidence. Lauren immediately reached for her phone. I'll call your dad. He needs to know this is happening. As she stepped away to make the call, I tried to process the whirlwind of developments. In just 24 hours, we'd gone from uncovering Diane's manipulation to potentially heading toward legal action. The stakes had risen dramatically, and I found myself at the center of a corporate drama I'd never anticipated when I first discovered my exclusion from that family portrait. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Lauren returned from the other room. That must be Robert from Wallace. Remember, this meeting was arranged before today's developments. We can still proceed with discussing your internship, but we'll need to be careful about what we share regarding Mitchell Media's current situation. I nodded, composing myself. Whatever happened next, I needed to stay focused on my original goal, establishing my place in the advertising world, with or without Mitchell Media as my platform. As Lauren went to answer the door, I couldn't help but wonder if the company my father had built would even exist in its current form by the time this all played out. Robert Devlin from Wallace Communications turned out to be nothing like the corporate executive I'd imagined. Instead of a stuffy suit, he was a laid-back man in his 40s with a relaxed demeanor and sharp, observant eyes. So you're James Mitchell's daughter, he said after introductions, studying me with undisguised interest. Your application and portfolio impressed our team, especially considering you're still in high school. Thank you, I replied, trying to focus on the internship discussion despite the chaos unfolding elsewhere. I've been passionate about advertising since I was young. Lauren tells me you've been working with a smaller agency to learn the fundamentals. Smart approach. Build your foundation before tackling the bigger challenges. As we settled in Lauren's dining room for dinner, Robert's questions were thoughtful and probing, centered on my understanding of the industry rather than my family connections. By the time we finished our meal, the conversation had evolved into a fascinating discussion about the future of advertising in digital spaces. I have to say, Cassidy, your perspective is remarkably developed for someone your age, Robert commented, leaning back in his chair. Most applicants to our program talk about creativity without understanding the strategic foundation that makes great advertising work. Lauren shot me an encouraging smile across the table. I told you she's exceptional. Robert nodded, then hesitated briefly. I hope you don't mind my asking, but there are rumors circulating in the industry about Mitchell Media possibly being acquired by North Star. Given your father's role as founder, I'm curious about your thoughts. Lauren tensed slightly, but I'd anticipated this question. Mitchell Media is exploring various strategic options, I replied carefully. My father believes in the company's independent creative vision, but market forces sometimes necessitate difficult decisions. Diplomatic answer, Robert observed, with a slight smile. But if it were up to you? Hypothetically speaking, of course. I met his gaze directly. Hypothetically, I believe Mitchell Media's strength has always been its independent creative perspective. Large conglomerates like North Star excel at scale, but often sacrifice the innovative edge that boutique agencies provide. The ideal path forward would preserve that creative independence while addressing modern market challenges. Robert exchanged a look with Lauren that I couldn't quite interpret. Well, he said finally, I think we've covered enough for tonight. Cassidy, consider this your formal interview for the Wallace Communications internship program. I'll be recommending your immediate acceptance. Thank you, I said, genuine gratitude cutting through my preoccupation with the family crisis. I appreciate the opportunity. After Robert left, Lauren turned to me with an appraising look. You handled that perfectly. Professional but not revealing anything sensitive about Mitchell Media's current situation. It wasn't just tact, I admitted. I genuinely believe what I said about preserving the company's creative independence. Lauren nodded thoughtfully. Robert picked up on that authenticity. But there was something else happening tonight that you might not have noticed. He wasn't just evaluating you for an internship. What do you mean? My phone buzzed before I could ask her to elaborate. It was a text from Dad. Executive session scheduled for 7 a.m. Patricia has prepared documents regarding Diane's conflict of interest. You're mentioned as having provided key insights that led to the discovery. Okay to include you in this capacity? I showed Lauren the message. He's asking if I want to be officially associated with exposing Diane. This could make things even worse at home. It's already worse, Lauren pointed out gently. Diane knows you've been instrumental in challenging her plans. The question now is whether you want formal recognition of your role in protecting Mitchell Media. Put that way, the answer seemed clear. I texted back, yes, including me. I stand by what we've discovered. Dad's reply was immediate. Proud of you, Cass. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be intense. Sleep, however, proved elusive. My phone continued buzzing with messages from both Trevor and Mason as the situation at home apparently deteriorated. Trevor Z. Texts grew increasingly accusatory, clearly receiving Diane's version of events. Dad's throwing away everything for a meaningless power trip. Mom says it's because you've been feeding him lies. Mason's messages, by contrast, remained neutral but concerned. Mom took stuff from Dad's office before I could stop her. She told Trevor it's her financial records but wouldn't let him see. Is something sketchy happening? I responded only to Mason, keeping it simple. Things are complicated right now. Best to wait for Dad to explain everything. Around midnight, a final text came from Dad. Diane has removed files from the home office. It confirms she also deleted emails from the server, but we have backups. Stay where you are. Patricia is seeking an emergency injunction regarding company documents. The legal terms were unfamiliar, but the message was clear. This had escalated beyond family drama into potential corporate legal action. I showed Lauren the message. An injunction means they're asking a court to prevent Diane from destroying or hiding documents relevant to her conflict of interest, she explained. This is serious, Cassidy. Your father is taking formal legal steps to protect the company from her actions. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possible outcomes and their implications for both Mitchell Media and our fragmented family. By dawn, I'd given up on rest and was sitting with Lauren at her kitchen counter, drinking strong coffee and reviewing notes for my Wallace Communications interview later that day. You could reschedule, Lauren suggested, noting my exhaustion. Given the circumstances, they'd understand. I shook my head firmly. No matter what happens with Mitchell Media, I need this opportunity on my own merits. I can't let Diane's actions derail my plans. At 7:30 a.m., Dad called from the executive session. Diane has been temporarily removed as CFO pending investigation of her communications with North Star, he reported, his voice tight with controlled emotion. The board voted unanimously after reviewing the evidence. Even the minor shareholders? I asked, knowing their votes were crucial, especially them. They were furious about being misled regarding the acquisition terms. He paused. Patricia is filing additional legal actions today regarding breach of fiduciary duty. The implications were staggering. What happens now? Things will move quickly on the legal front. On the family side, he sighed heavily. I'm not sure, Cassidy. Diane isn't just facing professional consequences. This affects everything, including my stepbrothers, who were caught in the middle of a situation they didn't fully understand. Have you spoken with Trevor and Mason? Briefly, this morning. Trevor refused to listen. He's firmly in Diane's camp. Mason was more receptive, at least willing to hear that there are serious concerns about his mother's actions regarding the company. After ending the call, I faced a difficult decision. Go home to pack proper clothes for school and my Wallace interview, or avoid the house entirely. Lauren settled the dilemma by offering to drive me home to quickly gather necessities while she waited in the car. If Diane's there, just get what you need and leave without engaging, she advised. This isn't the time for another confrontation. The house was quiet when I slipped in through the side door. Too quiet, considering the chaos of the previous night. I moved cautiously to my bedroom, quickly packing a small bag with clothes for school and my interview outfit. As I was zipping the bag closed, a voice from my doorway made me jump. So this is what betrayal looks like up close. Diane stood there, impeccably dressed as always, not a hair out of place despite the corporate and legal storm surrounding her. Only her eyes, cold with fury, revealed her true state. I didn't betray anyone, I replied steadily. You did that when you tried to sell Dad's company out from under him and tried to erase me from the family in the process. She entered my room uninvited, her movements controlled but tense. You have no idea what you've done, the opportunities you've destroyed. For what? Some childish need for Daddy's attention? For the truth, I countered, maintaining my distance. Did you really think Dad wouldn't eventually discover what you were doing? That no one would notice you systematically undermining Mitchell Media's creative foundation to make it more attractive for a corporate sale that primarily benefited you? A flash of something, perhaps surprised that I understood the full scope of her actions, crossed her face before her mask of composure returned. You think you're so clever, playing amateur detective and running to your father with selective information. You don't understand the business realities Mitchell Media is facing. I understand enough to know that secretly negotiating with North Star, while serving as Mitchell Media's CFO, represents a serious conflict of interest. The board certainly seemed to think so this morning. Her expression hardened. This temporary setback changes nothing. Your father is being short-sighted and emotional. putting his ego above practical business considerations. When cooler heads prevail, the North Star deal will proceed. Is that what Bradley Winters promised you, along with your senior VP position after the acquisition? I watched her carefully, noting the momentary widening of her eyes. Dad saw the emails, Diane. All of them. For a split second, her perfect facade cracked, revealing genuine alarm. Then she recovered, her voice dropping to a dangerous softness. You've made a serious mistake, Cassidy. This isn't a game where you score points against your wicked stepmother. There are real consequences to interfering in matters you don't understand. The implicit threat hung in the air between us. I shouldered my bag, refusing to show the unease her tone provoked. I understand more than you think, including that. This conversation is over. As I moved to leave, she stepped aside but delivered a final barb. When this all settles, don't expect your father to maintain this sudden interest in your advertising ambitions. James is easily distracted by shiny new projects, including daughters who've been absent from his life. Once the novelty wears off, he'll remember why he's kept you at arm's length all these years. The words were designed to wound, to plant seeds of doubt about Dad's renewed attention. 3 months ago, they might have worked. Now, I recognized the manipulation for what it was. That's the difference between us, Diane, I said quietly. I'm fighting for Dad's company because it matters to him, not because of what I can get out of it. You might want to consider what that says about why your marriage is falling apart, not just your business deal. I left her standing in my doorway, her perfect composure finally fracturing into visible anger. As I slid into Lauren's waiting car, the weight of the confrontation settled over me. That bad? Lauren asked, noting my expression. Diane was there. She's not giving up on the North Star deal, and she seems to think this is all just a temporary setback. Lauren pulled away from the curb, her expression concerned. She's in denial about the seriousness of the situation. Once the legal actions proceed, she'll understand she's facing more than just family discord. I stared out the window at the neighborhood I'd never quite felt at home in. What happens to Trevor and Mason in all this? They're caught in the middle of something they don't understand. That's the hardest part of family conflicts, Lauren acknowledged. The ripple effects touch everyone, even those not directly involved in the original problem. My phone buzzed with a message from Dad. The board has appointed an interim CFO and authorized me to develop an alternative strategic plan for the company. I'd like your input if you're willing. Despite everything, the confrontation with Diane, the uncertainty ahead, the strain on our already fractured family, I felt a surge of validation. Dad wasn't just acknowledging my concerns, he was actively seeking my involvement in Mitchell Media's future. I texted back, definitely willing. But first, I have an interview at Wallace Communications to prepare for. His response made me smile. Go show them what Mitchell can do. The Wallace Communications office occupied 3 floors of a sleek downtown building, its reception area showcasing award-winning campaigns on large digital displays. Despite the turmoil of the past 24 hours, I felt a surge of excitement as I stepped into the space for my formal interview. This moment represented everything I'd been working toward, recognition of my abilities separate from the Mitchell Media drama. Cassidy Parker? A young woman approached with a tablet. I'm Zoe, Robert's assistant. He's waiting for you in the creative conference room. As she led me through the office, I observed the workspace with keen interest. Unlike Mitchell Media's increasingly corporate atmosphere, Wallace maintained an open, collaborative environment. Design teams clustered around project boards, animated discussions flowed freely, and the energy felt electric. Robert greeted me warmly, introducing me to a panel of 3 others: Alicia Chen, Creative Director, Marcus Winters, Digital Strategy. Lead, and Tanya Brooks, Head of Talent Development. We were impressed with your application materials, Tanya began, but even more intrigued after Robert's conversation with you last night. He mentioned you have a unique perspective on advertising's future. For the next hour, I found myself engaged in the most stimulating professional conversation of my life. The questions weren't simple internship standards but challenging explorations of my creative philosophy, strategic thinking, and vision for evolving media landscapes. Despite my exhaustion and preoccupation with the Mitchell Media situation, I found myself fully present, energized by the exchange of ideas. Your concept work for Anderson Properties was particularly interesting, Alicia noted, referencing the speculative campaign I'd included in my portfolio. The approach bridges traditional brand values with contemporary digital engagement. Not many students your age maintain that balance. I believe enduring brands need both, I explained. Digital trends provide new channels, but the core storytelling fundamentals remain essential. Marcus nodded approvingly. That perspective aligns with our philosophy at Wallace. We've maintained growth precisely because we embrace new technologies without abandoning proven communication principles. As the interview concluded, Robert walked me out personally. I think it's clear to everyone that you'd be an asset to our program, he said. In fact, we'd like to offer you a position that goes beyond our standard internship. I looked at him surprised. What kind of position? A special project role, focused on developing fresh strategic approaches for established brands looking to reconnect with younger audiences. He hesitated briefly. Candidly, Cassidy, we've been following Mitchell Media's creative decline over the past few years. The industry has noticed their shift towards safer, more corporate work under the current leadership. The careful phrasing made it clear he was referring to Diane's influence without directly saying so. What would this special project entail exactly? I asked. Initially, you'd work with our strategy team on a concept we're developing for the Portland Business Alliance's annual competition. It's a high-visibility project showcasing innovative approaches to traditional marketing challenges. That sounds incredible, I admitted. But I should be transparent. My situation with Mitchell Media is complicated at the moment. Robert's expression suggested he understood more than he was saying. We've heard some industry chatter. Whatever's happening there won't affect our offer. This is about your talents, not your family connections. As I left the Wallace building, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Big developments. Diane refused to return company files. Judge granted a temporary restraining order. Meeting with the board again at 4 p.m. Where are you? I texted back. Just finished Wallace interview. They offered me a special project role beyond the standard internship. His response came quickly. That's fantastic, Cass. We should celebrate. Can you meet me at Mitchell Media at 3:30? I want to discuss something before the board meeting. When I arrived at Mitchell Media that afternoon, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Staff members huddled in small groups, conversations hushing as I passed. Angela at reception gave me a sympathetic smile. Your dad's waiting in the conference room, she said quietly. It's been quite a day around here. I found Dad reviewing documents with Patricia Reeves, the company's attorney, and one of the trustees for his voting shares. They both looked up as I entered, Dad's face lighting up despite the obvious strain of the situation. There she is, he said warmly. The newest member of Wallace Communications, though hopefully not for long. Patricia gathered her papers, nodding, politely as she excused herself. I'll give you two a moment before the meeting. James, remember what we discussed about the restructuring proposal? After she left, Dad gestured for me to sit. Congratulations on the Wallace position, Robert. Devlin called me personally to say how impressed they were. He called you? Why? Dad smiled slightly. Apparently to figure out whether poaching my daughter might cause problems between our agencies. I assured him your career decisions are entirely your own. This professional courtesy, treating me as a valued talent rather than just a high school student, felt significant. Thank you for that. I meant it. He pushed a folder across the table. But before you commit to Wallace, I'd like you to consider an alternative. Inside the folder was a document titled Mitchell Media Restructuring Proposal, Creative Renaissance Initiative. I looked up questioningly. The board has authorized me to develop a comprehensive plan to revitalize the company, Dad explained. One that returns to our creative roots while integrating modern digital approaches, exactly what you've been advocating. I skimmed the outline, noting key points about rebuilding the creative department, establishing a digital innovation lab, and restructuring client services to emphasize strategic partnerships over transactional relationships. This looks like a complete reversal of Diane's direction, I observed. It is. The board has seen enough evidence of her conflict of interest to support a fundamental course correction. He leaned forward. But I need help executing this vision, Cassidy. From someone who understands both Mitchell Media's original ethos and where the industry is heading. I felt a flutter of anticipation. What exactly are you proposing? A formal position. Director of Innovation Strategy. You'd work directly with me and the creative team to rebuild our approach, starting with the Anderson Properties campaign. The offer was breathtaking, far beyond anything I'd imagined when I first confronted. My exclusion from the family portrait. Dad, I'm 17. Still in high school? No one would take me seriously in that role. Your ideas and strategic thinking stand on their own merits. Your age is irrelevant. His expression grew serious. Besides, this wouldn't be nepotism, Cassidy. You've proven your understanding of both the business and creative sides of advertising. The Anderson proposal you developed was better than anything our team has produced recently. That's not my biased opinion. It's our clients' direct feedback. I sat back, processing this unexpected turn. What about legal issues with Diane? Won't this complicate things further? Patricia is handling that separately. The company's future can't wait for legal proceedings to conclude. He hesitated. I won't pretend this would be easy. Diane will fight these changes. Trevor has already made his allegiance clear, but Mitchell Media needs this transformation to survive as an independent agency. The weight of the decision settled over me. What about Wallace? I gave them my word I'd consider their offer. You absolutely should. Compare both opportunities and make the choice that's right for you. Dad reached across the table, briefly squeezing my hand. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you, Cass. Watching you stand up for what you believe in these past weeks has reminded me of the principles I'd started to compromise. Before I could respond, Patricia returned with several board members. It's time, James, she said. Everyone's assembled. Dad stood. Think about it, okay? We can talk more after the meeting. As the board members entered, several nodded respectfully in my direction. A small gesture that would have been unimaginable weeks ago when I was simply the founder's daughter who dabbled in dance. I left the conference room, finding a quiet corner in the creative department to review both opportunities. The Wallace position offered independence, the chance to build my reputation separate from family connections, and distance from the ongoing Mitchell Media drama. Dad's offer provided an unprecedented opportunity to help reshape a company I'd grown up loving, working directly with him to restore its creative vision. My contemplation was interrupted by a text from Mason. Mom got served legal papers. She's going ballistic, talking about moving us to her sister's place tonight. What's happening? The family fallout was accelerating faster than I'd anticipated. I called Mason immediately. She's packing our stuff, he said in a hushed voice. Saying Dad's lost his mind and trying to destroy everything. Trevor's helping her, but I don't know what to think. Mason, listen carefully. Mom and Dad are having serious disagreements about Mitchell Media's direction. There are also legal questions about some of Mom's business decisions. It's complicated, but you don't have to choose sides right now. His voice was small, younger than his 14 years. Does Dad know she's planning to take us? I don't think so. He's in a board meeting right now. I hesitated, not wanting to drag Mason deeper into the adult conflict, but knowing he deserved some clarity. Mom isn't just mad about business decisions, Mason. She's potentially facing legal consequences for her actions as CFO. Like criminal stuff? He asked, an alarm evident in his voice. I don't know exactly, but it's serious enough that rushing to leave might not be the best move right now. There was a long pause. I don't want to go to Aunt Karen's, and I don't think Mom's telling us everything. Trust your instincts, I said gently. You're smart, Mason. If something feels wrong, it probably is. What should I do? Can you stall? Tell her you need time to pack properly, that you have assignments to finish before leaving? I was buying time, knowing Dad needed to be informed about this development. Yeah, I guess. Trevor's all in with Mom's plan, though. Just focus on what feels right to you. I'll make sure Dad knows what's happening as soon as his meeting ends. After hanging up, I immediately texted Dad. Emergency. Diane is planning to take Trevor and Mason to her sister's tonight. Mason doesn't want to go. Need your advice ASAP. Then I texted Lauren. Diane escalating, planning to take the boys. Legal. Situation is getting intense. Her response was immediate. Coming downtown now. Don't let Diane see you if she shows up at Mitchell Media. The warning came too late. As I stood to find a more private place to call Lauren, I turned to see Diane striding purposefully through the creative department, her expression thunderous. Trevor trailed behind her, looking uncomfortable but determined. Of course you're here, Diane said coldly as she spotted me. Enjoying watching what you've destroyed? Several designers looked up, hastily pretending to focus on their work while obviously listening to every word. This isn't the place for this conversation, I said quietly. Oh, I think it's exactly the right place. Her voice carried deliberately through the open office. Everyone should know how the founder's daughter manipulated her way into undermining company leadership during a critical acquisition opportunity. Trevor stepped forward, his face flushed. You've turned Dad against us, against the whole family. The unfairness of this accusation stung, but I maintain my composure. That's not what happened, Trevor. There's a lot you don't understand about the situation. I understand enough, he shot back. Mom was saving this company while Dad was stuck. In the past. Now you've convinced him to throw everything away because you were jealous of being left out. Before I could respond, Dad emerged from the conference room, board members behind him. He stopped short at the tableau before him, Diane and Trevor confronting me in the middle of the creative department, staff members watching with undisguised interest. Diane, he said, his voice controlled but firm. This isn't appropriate. We should discuss matters privately. Privacy is over, James, she replied, turning to face him. You've made sure of that by involving attorneys and the board in what should have been family decisions. Your conflict of interest made this a corporate governance issue, not just a family matter, Dad responded, still maintaining his composure. And trying to remove Trevor and Mason from their home without discussion only makes things worse. Trevor's head snapped toward his mother. You said Dad knew we were going to Aunt Karen's. A flicker of unease crossed Diane's face, quickly masked. Your father has made his priorities clear, Trevor. The company comes before the family, before you and Mason. That's not true, Dad countered, his voice softening as he addressed Trevor directly. None of this is about choosing Mitchell Media over you boys. It's about honesty, integrity, and doing what's right. For the first time, uncertainty showed in Trevor's expression. Then why is Mom saying we have to leave tonight? That we can't trust you anymore? The question hung in the air, painfully exposing the manipulation Trevor and Mason had been subject to. Diane's careful narrative was unraveling as the contradictions became impossible to reconcile. In that moment, watching my stepbrother's confusion as he realized he didn't have the full story, I felt an unexpected wave of compassion. Trevor wasn't my adversary. He was another casualty of Diane's schemes, just as I had been in different ways. Trevor, I said gently, maybe it's time to hear Dad's side directly, without anyone interpreting for you. You deserve the whole truth, not just pieces of it." Diane's eyes flashed with anger, but it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, visible in Trevor's hesitation as he looked between his mother and stepfather, uncertain where the truth actually lay. 3 months can change everything. That's what I kept thinking as I stood on the sidewalk across from Mitchell Media's headquarters, staring up at my own face on the massive billboard that crowned the building. The image was striking, me in a professional pose, smiling confidently. Beside the new company slogan, "Fresh Perspectives, Timeless Creativity, Mitchell Media." My first major campaign as Director of Innovation Strategy, now literally larger than life above downtown Portland. "Still can't believe it?" Lauren asked, joining me on the sidewalk with 2 coffee cups, handing one to me. "It feels surreal," I admitted, accepting the coffee. This time last quarter, I wasn't even included in the family portrait. Now my face is the first thing people see when they look at Mitchell Media. "Poetic justice at its finest," she replied, with a smile. "Though I think we both know this is about more than just your face on a billboard." She was right, of course. The billboard represented something far more significant than a simple visual rebrand. It symbolized Mitchell Media's transformation from a company drifting toward corporate mediocrity into a revitalized creative force, and my own journey from excluded stepdaughter to key architect of that renewal. The 3 months following the sigh. Confrontation with Diane had been intense, challenging, and ultimately transformative for both the company and our family. After that pivotal day in the creative department, when Trevor first began questioning his mother's narrative, events had accelerated rapidly. Dad had called an emergency family meeting that evening, just him, Trevor, Mason, and me, where he laid out the complete truth about Diane's actions regarding Mitchell Media. He shared the emails showing her secret negotiations with North Star, the financial records revealing how she'd systematically undermined the company's creative foundation, and her planned executive position with North Star after the acquisition. "I'm not asking you to choose between your mother and me," Dad had told the boys. "That wouldn't be fair to either of you. I'm just asking that you understand why these legal actions are necessary to protect the company." Trevor had remained skeptical but less hostile, while Mason had surprised everyone with his perceptiveness. "Mom's been talking about moving to Chicago for months," he'd revealed quietly. "Said we'd have a fresh start after the business transition was complete. That's North Star's headquarters, isn't it?" That small detail, Diane planning their relocation to North Star's home city long before any deal was finalized, had hit Trevor hard, the final piece that made her deception impossible to ignore. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly after that. Diane was permanently removed as CFO, with the board pursuing financial restitution for her breach of fiduciary duty. North Star quickly distanced themselves from the situation, publicly denying any improper negotiations, while quietly cutting ties with Bradley Winters, whose emails with Diane had proven particularly damaging. On the personal front, Dad filed for divorce, with Diane moving to her sister's house alone after both boys elected to remain in the family home with their stepfather, a decision that shocked her but made sense given the truth they'd finally been able to see clearly. "You coming inside?" Lauren's question pulled me back to the present. "The team is waiting for the campaign presentation." I nodded, taking a final glance at the billboard. "Still can't believe we convinced the board to approve that as our new brand statement. Your father was your biggest champion. Said it was time Mitchell Media's public face reflected its true creative leadership." Inside the Mitchell Media offices, the transformation was equally dramatic. Gone were the sterile corporate elements Diane had implemented. The space hummed with collaborative energy, design teams working in flexible arrangements, and the walls once again showcased bold creative concepts rather than generic corporate messaging. The conference room was packed when we arrived, not just with Mitchell Media staff but representatives from 5 major clients, including Mr. Anderson, whose enthusiastic response to my initial concepts had been a catalyst for so much change. Dad stood at the head of the table, looking more energized and engaged than I'd seen him in years. The months of rebuilding Mitchell Media had reinvigorated him, reconnecting him with the creative passion that had made the company successful in the first place. "There she is," he announced as I entered. "The architect of our Renaissance campaign. Cassidy will walk us through the integrated strategy we're implementing across all client platforms this quarter." As I made my way to the front of the room, I caught sight of Mason and Trevor slipping in through the side door. Their presence was unexpected. Trevor was home from his first semester at Washington State, having reconsidered Penn State after everything that happened, and Mason had a debate tournament that afternoon. Yet here they were, sliding into seats along the wall, Trevor giving me a small nod of acknowledgement. Our relationship had evolved into something I'd never anticipated. Not quite siblings, but no longer adversaries. A tentative respect had formed, particularly after he'd seen my work at Mitchell Media firsthand. "Before I begin," I said, addressing the room, "I want to emphasize that this campaign represents a collaborative effort across all departments. The concepts I'm about to present reflect Mitchell Media's renewed commitment to blending innovative, digital approaches with the timeless creative principles that built our reputation. For the next 40 minutes, I presented our strategy for redefining how traditional businesses connect with modern consumers, the same fundamental challenge that had faced Mitchell Media itself." The client representatives leaned forward with growing interest as I outlined approaches that were bold without being reckless, innovative without abandoning proven fundamentals. When I concluded, the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Mr. Anderson was the first to speak. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," he declared. "Fresh perspective that respects our established brand values while pushing us into new territory. Frankly, this is the Mitchell Media we originally signed, with creative, strategic ahead of the curve." The other clients murmured agreement, several taking notes with evident excitement. Dad stood to wrap up the presentation, pride evident in his expression. "This approach, balancing innovation with proven fundamentals, isn't just our campaign strategy," he explained. "It's become our company philosophy, thanks largely to Cassidy's influence. Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective to remind us of what made us successful in the first place." After the clients departed with several scheduling immediate follow-up meetings, Dad pulled me aside. "That was exceptional, Cass. The entire team is energized in a way I haven't seen in years. It's amazing what happens when people feel their creativity is valued," I replied. "Speaking of which, how's the Wallace collaboration coming along?" Robert Devlin had immediately recognized the potential, proposing a formal alliance that allowed each agency to maintain its independence while collaborating on projects requiring complementary strengths. The arrangement had already brought new clients to both firms and reinvigorated staff at all levels. "Robert called this morning," Dad replied. "The joint pitch for the Portland Business Alliance campaign was approved unanimously. They want both agencies to present the final concept together next month." Trevor approached us, hands in his pockets, still carrying himself with the slightly awkward confidence of a college freshman finding his footing. "The billboard looks good," he said, his compliment genuine, if still somewhat reserved. "Mom's going to hate it." "Probably," I acknowledged. There was no point pretending Diane's reaction would be anything but negative. The divorce proceedings had turned acrimonious, with her bitterness intensifying as she watched Mitchell Media flourish under its new direction. A direction that prominently featured the stepdaughter she'd tried so hard to exclude. "She still doesn't get it," Mason added, joining our circle. "Keeps saying Dad chose the company over family, when she's the one who tried to dismantle everything." Dad put an arm around Mason's shoulders. "Some people have trouble recognizing their own role in creating difficult situations. Your mom made choices that had consequences she didn't anticipate. Like underestimating Cassidy," Trevor said unexpectedly, meeting my eyes directly. "That was probably her biggest mistake." The acknowledgement from my once hostile stepbrother felt like the final piece falling into place in this long, complicated journey. Not perfect resolution. Life rarely offers that, but a genuine recognition of truth. Later that evening, as the sunset painted Portland's skyline in golden hues, our unconventional family gathered on the patio of Dad's new downtown apartment. The divorce had necessitated selling the West Hills house, but the change felt appropriate, a fresh start in a space without the lingering tensions of recent years. Mason was setting up the grill while Trevor and Dad debated the merits of different business programs at Washington State. Lauren chatted with Rachel, who had become a regular presence at these informal gatherings, her small agency now formally aligned with Mitchell Media for certain client projects. I stepped back, observing this reconfigured family with a sense of wonder at how dramatically circumstances had changed since I'd first discovered my exclusion from that family portrait. "Penny for your thoughts?" Lauren asked, joining me at the railing overlooking the city. In the distance, the Mitchell Media building was visible, my billboard catching the last rays of sunlight. I was just thinking about how differently everything turned out than I expected, I admitted. When I first realized Diane had deliberately excluded me from that portrait, all I wanted was to be recognized, to not be erased from my own family. Lauren nodded. And now? Now I understand it was never really about being in the picture. It was about having a voice, in the family, in the company, in my own future. I gestured toward the gathering behind us. This isn't what I imagined family would look like, but it's real in a way it never was when Diane was manufacturing the perfect image. That's the thing about authentic connections, Lauren observed. They don't always look perfect from the outside, but they're built on something substantial. Dad called us over as he prepared to make a toast, raising his glass as we all gathered around. To new beginnings, unexpected partnerships, and the courage to fight for what matters most. As we clinked glasses, my phone buzzed with a message from Angela at reception. "You won't believe this. North Star's stock dropped 15% today after losing the Westlake account. Rumor is they're struggling without the acquisitions Diane promised them." Poetic justice, I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket without sharing the news. Some victories didn't need to be announced. They simply needed to be noted as confirmation that standing up for what's right eventually bears fruit. The billboard with my face might be the most visible symbol of transformation, but the real change was much deeper. In Mitchell Media's renewed, creative spirit, in our reconfigured family's genuine connections, and in my own understanding of what it means to truly belong somewhere. Diane had tried to exclude me from a carefully staged portrait that represented the image of family rather than its reality. In doing so, she had inadvertently set in motion events that led to my face becoming the public image of the company she'd tried to sell out from under us. But more importantly, she had pushed me to fight for my rightful place, not just in a key photograph, but in the living, breathing, imperfect family and company that were my true inheritance. As the sun set over Portland, casting long shadows across the city, I raised my glass in a private toast to my younger self, the girl who had stood staring at that family portrait, feeling erased and insignificant. She could never have imagined that exclusion would become the catalyst for finding her voice, her strength, and ultimately, her place in a world far bigger than a single framed photograph could ever contain. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.